All right, everybody. I am going to talk a little bit about adjustment layers in Photoshop and the different types, and let's go take a look. Okay, so I'm going to open this image here in Adobe Camera Raw because that's normally where we're going to start from before we go into Photoshop. We'll edit, make things the way we like it in here, and then we will go right into Photoshop and start working. Just going to show you this feature in case you're not used to it, and that's there is a feature in here right in uh, the main window, which you can use that when you open up the basics adjustments. Is you come in here obviously and start to adjust these, but there's an auto setting too, which will give you just a starting line to go with if you like. I don't always like to use this, but we'll go with that here. Um, And then one thing before we go into Photoshop that's always important to remember is that we come down here to this little text where it says a bunch of information about the image. We click on that and we just want to make sure that our workflow options, right? That in the bottom it says Photoshop, open in Photoshop as Smart Object. We want to do that because that allows us to be able to always come back into Adobe Camera Raw and make further edits at any point in our editing process. So I'm going to click Open Object, and when I do that, it's going to open up the image. There we go. And so we have this image. So let's talk a little bit about what adjustment layers do. So we want to work in a non-destructive fashion, meaning that anything we're doing, we're kind of doing in layers on top of the image, or just working in such a way that we're not actually affecting the pixels directly, and that allows us to not slowly kind of erode the quality of the image while we're working in Photoshop. So you can make direct adjustments. For example, you can go to image, you can go to adjustments. Okay, these are image adjustments. These are direct. So I could go this way and I could do, say, a hue saturation change. And the slider, the control will look very similar. Let's say I wanted to make this less saturated, but let's say I wanted to give it, I don't know, just like a really kind of a different vibe there. I'm going to change the hue like this and then click OK. When I do that, that's happening to the smart object, right? And so in this case, actually, because I have a smart object open, it's allowing me to do this, and it's doing it as a smart filter, which is non-destructive. So that's great, actually, that's doing that. But I'm going to click undo, and I'm just going to rasterize this layer by right-clicking or command-clicking on the layer, and I'm going to rasterize it, which means that it's no longer a smart object. Now, this is just wanted to point this out to you. Image, adjustment, hue saturation. Let's go again here, do a little desaturation. Now I've just made this change directly onto the image layer, okay? That, um, and so I can't really undo this. If I start going forward and doing other things, the only way to undo this is to take it off, like to go all the way back in time and restart. It's also making a permanent change up here to my histogram. Um, so what the better way to do this would be, let's go back, and now instead of going to image adjustments, we're going to go to layer, and then we're going to go say new adjustment layer, and now we'll go into hue saturation. We'll click OK here. It's just asking me to name this, and now it pops right up here. And so I can decrease my saturation. I can again change the hue to make it look kind of a little interesting. And now I can go ahead and I can close this, but now it opens that as a layer, right? So that's an adjustment layer as opposed to an direct adjustment on my image, right? And so now if I decide, I don't want this, I can just delete it at any point, right? Even if I have additional adjustment layers, I can go back and turn it off, or I can just drag it right down here to the trash can and get rid of it, and it's all gone. And I don't have to do that in any particular order. It's dynamic. Okay. Let's just get that layer back. Let's take a look at just some other types of layers. So that's an adjustment layer, right? And um, what are some other types of layers? So if we go to layer, well, we can just make a new blank layer, right? We can just go layer, new layer. And when we do that, we'll ask us what are we going to name it. Say, I don't know. And by default, that layer is not going to have anything in it, right? So it's just going to be blank, right? So it's basically invisible. But if I decided that I wanted to, like, say, paint on it or something like that, I could come to the brush tool and I could, you know, change a color. And maybe I wanted to like have something that was similar. Maybe if I wanted a really similar color, I can use the color eyedropper tool here, which automatically comes up. Um, if I wanted to make it a little bit more intense, and then I could increase my brush size by coming up into these controls, and I could actually add in some painting effect here. Now this is really intense. It's a bit too intense, right? But just goes to the point that when I'm working on this, I'm just working on this layer, right? So this would just be an open layer. We could also think about it as a fill layer too. But this is just a new layer. Um, of course, we have, I'm going to turn this off for a second. We have the down here, the actual image layer that has the image or the pixel data on it, right? Some of these other layers are designed to sort of basically be overlays, right? An adjustment layer doesn't do anything if it doesn't, it's unless if it doesn't have anything to act upon. Okay, so also remember that let's look at a couple different ones. So if we go up to layer and we go to new fill layer, there's a couple different types of fills that we can do. We could do a solid color. We could do a gradient. Let's try a gradient. So a gradient, let's click OK. And now when we do a gradient fill, it's going to ask us what type of gradient we would like. We have some choices here. Some are preset. You can create new ones. But I'm just going to go this one that goes from a color, whatever the foreground color is. I had that kind of purpley hue to transparent. And then you can change the angle around. And when it does that, you can see how it's going to affect things. Okay. So you can see how that's working. But I think I'm just going to try I'm going to flip. What can I do here? Let's just try this instead with go back. I'm going to change this, flip this to black for it to be my foreground color, then come back and go layer, new, gradient. Okay. Yeah, and so now we can actually see kind of how that gradient works if it's just a black. Or maybe we wanted to do something else and we could play around with that, right? But here but just to give you an example of how this would look different if I went from black to white, well, now it's just going to be this overall fill layer, okay? And well, let's go back to that transparent one. And we can click on that. And of course, that changes things quite a bit. Remember, we can change opacity of an individual layer, so I can decrease the intensity of that layer, essentially. I'm going to turn it on and turn it off. Another thing to remember that layers have a hierarchy to them. So over here, I have this layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. If I take this top layer that was like this kind of painted layer, and if I drag it all the way underneath to the bottom, then it's no longer going to be seen because it's under my image layer. And my image layer is effectively opaque right now because it's set, partially because it's an image layer and it's got pixel information, but also because the opacity of that layer is set to 100%. So, it's effectively opaque. It doesn't have any, checkerboard, which indicate transparency to that layer. So remember, it kind of works like gravity. Whatever's below, whatever's above affects whatever's below. It's going to fall onto it. Um, yeah, so a couple other, two other types of layers that we often reference are shape layers, which are vector-based layers. So if you're doing something that has a shape, it's easy to come over to the tools to the line tool and do something like, let's say, a polygon tool or a rectangle tool. If you were creating some kind of polygon, which you can adjust the how many sides and stuff up above. But if you create a polygon, that's going to create a shape layer, right? And that shape is going to be dictated, the fill of that is going to be dictated um, by whatever the foreground color is down here, my foreground versus my background color. But if I wanted to change this, for example, I could change this polygon to a different color. I would just need to find a different color to get to add to it. So yeah, all very interesting why that's turning in. It's such a different color, but I think that's got to do with the hue shifts. Um, but anyway, you get a sense of that. And that is a vector-based layer, so you can go back and change the size of it. It's resolution independent, unlike pixels. You can move it around, do free transform and other things like that. Another layer that we work with typically is a text layer. So if you wanted to add text to Photoshop, you can either just click and start typing, or you can create like a boundary box where the text would um, appear. So if we wanted to say like playa or something like that, we could change the fonts size of this, um, text face and everything like that. But we could create this text, and this is a text-based layer. Okay, so these are some different types of layers that we're often using, and I hope that's helpful.